when you're talking about the idea of education, as all of us are aware that education is primarily considered as the public good. So if you refer to the writings of the welfare economists, including the world famous, let's say, economist of India by name Amartya Sen, who also talks about the idea of the Human Development Index, and Amartya Sen along with Mujbul ul Haq, the Pakistan economist, these were the two scholars who have developed the very idea of, let's say, development from the perspective of human development. So, according to which the access to education, access to basic healthcare, and also access to and also the life expectancy are primarily considered as three important indicators to measure the very idea of human development. That means when talking about development, all of us should remember that education is a precondition for the development of a society. Then we have to ask one question ourselves. What is the significance of education? Why most of the countries are talking about education for all? Why almost all the countries have declared education as a fundamental right? So what are the issues and challenges? Sir, what are the factors which primarily driving the government as well as the civil society organizations to declare education as a fundamental right? So, my dear friends, if you look at carefully, until the beginning of the 20th century, education was not considered as a public good. Education was nothing to do with economy. That's one of the reasons why most of very few people, hardly 5% of the people in pre-modern societies were illiterate, and even among the 5%, hardly 1% of the people were very much aware of the knowledge systems. That means access to the sacred knowledge systems as well as the secular knowledge system. So the point I'm trying to drive is that we're talking about the idea of education in pre-modern era. Education was primarily viewed from the perspective of the cultivation of knowledge. So therefore, as our friend rightly mentioned, education is all about cultivation of mind. So the point is that what are the factors which led to the popularization of education in the modern era? As I mentioned just a few minutes ago, right, it is the industrialization of the Western countries which ultimately led to the universalization of education. Why universalization of education? If you look at carefully, the industrial society demanded new value systems as well as new skill system, because until pre-modern era, all the human beings were part of agrarian economy. So agrarian economy was primarily organized on the principles of basic, organized on the principles of indigenous knowledge systems. Most of the people are those people who are involved in agriculture. They are very much aware of the seasons of agriculture. That's where they used to. That's where the very idea of agriculture circle was very much familiar with the farmers. Similarly, different sections of the society who are engaged in different occupations, they were the masters of their respective occupations, though they were not at all part of the formal education, but because by doing a form of apprenticeship, that means by looking at their parents, the way they primarily produce the pots, the way in which they primarily produce produce uh, the cards, the way in which they primarily produce the chapels, or the way in which they primarily prepare the saris and dhotis and so on and so forth. So that means when you look at the diverse occupations which are very much part of the caste system, right? Both the men and women of the respective families were very much familiar with the indigenous knowledge systems. So therefore, my dear friends, the indigenous knowledge systems were primarily mediated through the very idea of the apprenticeship within the family. So, but now the question is, when the world or when the developed countries has moved away from agrarian societies to industrial economy, the industrial economy ultimately produced the process of urbanization. So when you're talking about the urbanization and the urban life, as some of the sociologists rightly use urbanization as a way of life, industrialization as a way of life. So we're talking about industrialization, which primarily needs a new value systems as well as new skill system. So that's where, my dear friends, the Western countries from the middle of the 19th century to the middle of the 20th century, all these countries have primarily followed the universalization of elementary education for the working class people and universalization of secondary education for the middle class people and higher education for the elite sections of the society. So one can say that this very idea of education was very much based on the class. At the same time, education was also based on the notions of gender. So wherein the women from upper class and middle class were primarily exposed to at least some secondary education, whereas women from lower classes were exposed to the very idea of the elementary education. So the spirit of the point was that the creating the ideal wife, sorry, creating the ideal wife and ideal mother was the basic essence of the education system in the early part of the 20th century, and also the industrialization, which primarily works on the principles of 24 to 7, wherein the workers as well as workers, managers, and as well as the middle level officers, all of them were supposed to follow a disciplined life. So, but how to cultivate the disciplined life is another important question. So, this is where, my friends, the disciplined life was very much cultivated through the idea of the education. As all of you are aware that education is one of the primary agents of socialization. That means after family was the primary source of socialization, because most of the children and most of the youth, they spend large part of their life with their family members. So whatever we learn, mostly we learn from our family. But at the same time, when you look at, yeah, the societies are moving slowly towards industrialization and post-industrialization. Most of the young children and the youth are day by day spending their time in the educational institutions, unlike the earlier generations. Now, the educational institutions have become the primary drivers of socialization. So, therefore, my dear friends, what kind of socialization the educational institutions have to offer becomes one of the, and why the education system has acquired the highest form of importance, why most of the not why the middle, upper class and middle class, they are very much keen to educate their children, and why even the poorest of the poor, the means those who belong to the working class communities, why they are very much keen to educate the children in the 20 from the late 20th century to the early part of the 21st century. If you go into the details, it primarily highlights that education is considered as a sign of progress, a sign of modernity, a means of development, as well as a means of empowerment. That means education has a multiple meanings. So what do you mean by education? So how to understand education from the different meanings which are associated with the development. So if you look at very carefully, education is a symbol of progress from the perspective of the upper class or from the perspective of elite. That means only the educated people are going to be referred as civilized people. That means that, of course, every historical juncture has its own idea of education. In the ancient India, it was the Sanskrit which was considered as the important language, as a language of knowledge. In the medieval India, the Persian and Arabic became the means of language mediation. In the modern India, English became the means of, let's say, symbolic empowerment. So therefore, if you look at it closely, almost all the elite sections of the society were known for giving the highest importance to education, which was there in demand of that particular era, right? So now the question is, what is the meaning of education from the perspective of the development, especially when you look at from the perspective of the nation building and also from the perspective of the middle classes and the working classes. So when you look at education from the perspective of nation building, right, modern nations are primarily built on the foundations of democracy, which primarily demands the very idea of equality, liberty, and fraternity. So now the question is that the idea of modern nation primarily, let's say, equated with the idea of the idea of the citizen. Citizen is a person who is entitled for the fundamental rights. Citizen is a person who is referred as a partner in the development of the nation. Unlike the pre-modern era, where the people are referred as subjects, whereas the rulers were known for enjoying the absolute control or absolute power over the over the people. So I think that's where, my dear friends, we need to understand that the idea of education has a lot. Education has the potential, or education played very important role in transforming the subjects to citizens. So that means we are talking about the making of a modern citizen. All of us should remember that it is education which primarily creates a sense of let's say which primarily creates a sense of nation development. So that's where, my dear friends, when you look at all the educational institutions, especially the schools, colleges, and sometimes in the universities, so the way our entire school education, our entire schedule, the schedule of the educational institutions primarily organized on the principles of cultivating the nation building, starting from the national anthem and national song, from morning to right on every important days of an important national days as well as regional days. We are known for celebrating the very idea of nation. And also, if we look at textbooks, most of the textbooks talks about the idea of nation building. It primarily demands that all the citizens of a respective country should accept the rules and regulations, or should respect the sovereignty of the nation, and also should promote the national interests. So therefore, my dear friends, here what we need to understand is that the idea of education was primarily used as important means to cultivate the spirit of nation building as well as nationalism. So that's one of the reasons why, when you look at carefully, most of the educated people are very much aware of the importance of national building compared to the non-educated or simple educated people. Now, why education is also important from the perspective of national development and progress. If you look at carefully, right, all the human society, especially the developing countries like Asia and Africa, right, until 1970s were known for, let's say, known for witnessing the highest levels of fertility and highest levels of mortality. That means higher levels of higher birth rates as well as higher levels of death rate when compared to the Western countries. In the sense, my dear friends, by early part of the 20th century, most of the Western countries have achieved the lower levels of death rate because of the advancement of medical technology. But in the case of Asia and Africa, because of lack of technology and because of lack of cultural awareness, so my dear friends, we used to see the higher levels of birth rate, though the death rate has declined, but the birth rate is continuing to, let's say, even now is continuing. That means in some different states have different policies. Some states are following two-child policy. Some states are following three-child or four-child policy. So overall, what I mean to say is that the education has the potential to even determine the population control. So that's one of the reasons why, my dear friends, most of the studies argue that the educated parents are known for opting for only either a two-child policy or one-child policy. If you look at very carefully, most of the young couple, they were known for, because of the educational awareness, they were no they were very much keen to follow the population control methods. So the point here I want to highlight is that education is one of the important means of population control. So by through the population control, we are working towards the idea of the national progress and national development. That is another. And another important point, my dear friends, one should understand is that we are talking about the idea of education. Education has the potential to has a vital education has a potential to shape the quality of health services as well as the quality of agricultural services. If you look at carefully, education, my dear friends, most of the people they suffer from lack of health education or hygiene education. So though we always, let's say, we tend to assume that people are aware of we take it for granted about the health education. As you are very much aware, because of lack of health awareness, there are number of deaths which primarily happens because of the polluted water, because of polluted air, because of a lack of proper civic amenities in the respective, let's say, areas. So therefore, my dear friends, when we're talking about the idea of education, we need to understand that education plays very important role even in shaping the idea of quality healthcare. And apart from this, you should also understand that education is one of the important means for promoting the best agricultural practices. So, my dear friends, when you look at very carefully, most of the farmers until 1980s were not very much educated. Most of the farmers were not educated because these are the farmers based on the traditional knowledge systems. They used to cultivate the land, and though some of the traditional practices were very much good, they were known for, let's say, they were known for sustaining or providing the sustainable livelihood for thousands of years. But the optimum utilization of resources were primarily started in the post-Green Revolution era. So, if you look carefully, the studies by economists, sociologists, anthropologists primarily highlights the importance of education even in following, in adopting the Green Revolution methods, especially with reference to the idea of the high yielding varieties as well as the application of pesticides and so on and so forth. So now the point is that, my dear friends, these are some of the important, let's say, issues which primarily deals with the physical notions of development and the physical ideas, the physical resources, which are very much essential for a meaningful life. Because even now, despite of the advancement of science and technology, we are forced to witness, let's say, a lack of quality healthcare and lack of quality water in different parts of the country. So therefore, my dear friends, here, apart from the state which is expected to provide the basic services, but what is the role of education in creating awareness about the facilities which are there in the society? So this is where, my dear friends, we should also refer to some of the important ideas which primarily comes from the UNDP and also the Millennium Developmental Goals. So, my dear friends, I request some of you, to those who are speaking, so please be on mute. It is disturbing all of us. Okay.
എത്രയാണ് റേറ്റ്?
No, please mute yourself. Okay. So the basic. No, I request the organizers to please mute the people who are speaking.
Done, sir. Done, sir.
Okay.
Done, sir. Done.
Okay. So, my dear friends, the basic idea is that when you so if you look at carefully, the UNDP reports as well as the Millennium Developmental Goals, right, which are very much emphatic on the idea of the development, especially the sustainable development. So the question is that, my dear friends, we're talking about the sustainable development. The basic idea which primarily reflects or represents is the development in line in the view of the future. So the development of the present and development for future. So as a human beings, we have tendency of approaching the nature from the perspective of the present. So we generally the very idea of development from the perspective of the present day needs. So therefore, my dear friends, we compromise on the future needs of the coming generations. So now the question is, we're talking about the mother earth, or we're talking about the entire universe, right? How to conceptualize the earth and the universe for the future generations? So this is where, my dear friends, the Millennium Developmental Goals are primarily highlighting the different forms of the developmental agenda. So now the question is, what are the major issues, and who are the major stakeholders of this very idea of development? Right. So is it the developed nations which has to promote, which has to contribute towards the idea of human development towards the sustainable development, or it is the responsibility of the developing countries which has to contribute towards the sustainable development. So if you look at very carefully, there are multiple debates on the question of who has to take responsibility. So my dear friends, on the one hand, most of the developed nations were known for exploiting the global nature global nature from let's say from the 19th century, from the mid 19th century to almost the middle of the 20th century. And even now, when you look at the profile of the most of the MNCs, these MNCs primarily comes from the Western countries, that means including America. And if you go in detail, the entire exploitation of the human resource, the entire exploitation of the natural resources, including mining and so on and so forth, are primarily these companies are owned by the highly advanced countries. So now, given this kind of experience, and by exploiting the human resource and also the human resources in the form of slavery, in the form of indentured labor, most of the colonial countries in particular and Western countries in general were known for accumulating the wealth, the massive wealth, not only for the present generation but future generation of these countries. But now, when you're talking about the idea of development from the perspective of the the indigenous countries, how to understand the idea. So this is where, my dear friends, some of the scholars are arguing that, especially scholars from developing countries, they argue that it is the responsibility of the developed countries to take care of the idea of the sustainable futures. Because the developing countries are primarily either is a boon or pain, but most of the developing countries, the entire 50%, more than 50% of the population are primarily located in developing countries such as India, China, and all the African countries and Asian countries, and also Latin America, and so on and so forth. So now the point is when how to meet the demands of these, let's say 70% of the population who are primarily residing in a countries like in a developing countries like in these developing countries. So that's where, my dear friends, what we need to understand here is that the has a development has a global, let's say, dimension, because until recently it is the Western countries which exploited the nature. Now they are talking about the idea of development. So now the point is how to meet the demands of the current generation, right? And how to feeding the if you look at carefully, feeding the nation is the primary goal of the most of the developing countries, because as all of you are aware that Indian agriculture was primarily known for following the primitive form of, let's say, cultivation until 1970s, and it created, let's say, and also the India was not in a position to even feed the nation until 1970s. So at that juncture, so government of India has adopted the very idea of green revolution. So in the post, only after green revolution, the people of India are in a position to eat the food properly in the sense, at least the food materials, food grains are very much available in different parts of the country. So now the question is, at least India, at least acquired the India is successful. India has become a successful country in producing higher grains. But when you look at the other countries, such as other Asian countries and also the African countries, what is their future and how to, let's say, develop science and technology, or how to develop industries without, let's say, using some of the natural resources. But if you look at carefully, most of the Western countries, right, in the name of pollution or in the name of ozone layer and so on and so forth, these Western countries are talking about that always try to, let's say, impose number of rules and regulations or number of sanctions in the form of let's say to control the idea of natural resources. But my dear friends, the political agenda in the developing countries is to explore the natural resources to meet the needs of the people. So this is where, my dear friends, we're talking about development. one should understand that the development of one countries is referred as underdevelopment. That's where I'm sure some of you were those who are from economics and sociology, anthropology, you are very much aware of one of the major debate which came in the context of 1970s, which is popular known as the development of underdevelopment theory, which is part of the world systems theory. So the basic idea is that the world is primarily divided into the core and the periphery. And even now, it is the demands of the core, it is the demands of the core which drives the world, whereas all the Asian African countries are even now part of the periphery. So, my dear friends, the idea is that we are talking about the development and sustainable development. How to understand the sustainability from the perspective of present fulfilling the present day needs as well as keeping the interests of the future generation in the mind. So this is where, my dear friends, we need to understand the global dimension with reference to the development as well as underdevelopment and development and sustainable development. So now the question is that, my dear friends, all those Western countries who have achieved the development by early part of 20th century or by middle of the 20th century, now they are talking about the global pollution and so on and so forth, and discourages all the developing countries to make use of the natural resources and in a meaningful sense. So now that's where we as a scholars, as a academics, we need to understand the politics of development and also the politics of underdevelopment. That is first one. And secondly, we're talking about the development from the perspective of, let's say, the diverse social communities. What is the meaning of development from the perspective of middle classes? What is the meaning of development from the perspective of the working class? What is the meaning of development from the perspective of the blacks and whites in the context of West? And also, what is the meaning of the development from the perspective of men and women in different parts of the world in general, in India in particular? So, if you look at carefully, education is primarily referred as one of the important means of development for the middle classes. As very much those who are aware of the writings of one of the famous scholar by name B.B. Mishra, who wrote on the making of middle class in India, who talks about how the industrial revolution in India or how the colonial state has produced a new middle class and how the post-independent India has also promoted or produced large scale the making of large higher levels of the middle class population. If you look at carefully, my dear friends, very carefully, the middle class, education is the one and only means of development. There is no alternative for the middle class people. Though people talk about the diverse means of development, such as self employment, such as business, and so on and so forth, but if you look at carefully, for majority of the middle classes, in order to lead a meaningful life, or in order to ensure the middle class status to their children, in order to ensure the middle class status to the children, they are very much keen to promote education as a means of development. So that's where, my dear friends, as we are living in the era of the equality of opportunities versus equality of conditions, though as you are very much aware that the constitution guarantees equality of opportunities, fine, but what is the meaning of equality of conditions? Whether the people, whether the though they belong to the middle class, whether the men and women, and whether the young boy and girl, let's say from a rural, let's say Maharashtra, rural Andhra Pradesh, do they get equal opportunities despite of, let's say, they're hailing from a kind of let's say a farmer's background with less 10 acres of the land in the village, they may be considered as a kind of middle class in the respective sense. But as you are very much aware that the idea of education was very much, let's say, based on the class dimension. It's also very much based on gender dimension. Here, the point is that we are talking about education. For a middle class, education is a one of the important source to retain their middle class identity. From the perspective of working class, my dear friends, education is the only means of mobility. There is no alternative source of mobility for the working class children. So that's one of the reason why, if you look at carefully, the most of the working class children, they started going to schools in the post 1990s, right? Almost one can see that universalization of education among the working class children. And by 2000 or 2010, can also see the massification of higher education, wherein the students from the working class background, who are popularly known as the first generation learners. I'm sure all of you are aware of in your colleges, when you look at carefully, once upon a time until 1990s or before 2000, most of the colleges in India were filled with all the middle class children. Whereas very few, hardly 20% of the students from the working class background used to join in the colleges before 1990s. But if you look at carefully, in the post 1990s, after liberalization, privatization, and globalization, it is the only all the middle class children are going to engineering colleges, are going to medical colleges, or pharma colleges, or the business related courses, whereas all the first generation learners, irrespective of their caste, are going to all the traditional colleges, which primarily offers BA, BCom, and BSc. So, my dear friends, so this is where we need to understand the class and academic divide. We need to understand the class and gender divide. We need to understand the class and spatial divide, the divide between rural and urban. So, my dear friends, but why? But what is the significance of even traditional degrees such as BA, BCom, and BSc for a first generation learner? We look at very carefully. No working class parent wanted to see their children as a working class children. As the one of the founders of Wipro, or the owner of the Wipro company, by name Ajim Premji, rightly says, no farmer in India wanted to see their children as a farmers. Similarly, my dear friends, no no working class parent wanted to see their children as a agricultural or landless agricultural laborers, or they don't want to see their children in the informal work. So this is where, my dear friends, we need to understand the idea that we're talking about education. Education has the potential to mediate, or education has the potential to provide provide the upward mobility in the society. So if you look at very carefully, thanks to the equality of opportunities guaranteed by the government of India from 1947, and also equality of conditions by opening number of hostels both in the colleges and as well as universities and school level, one can see that the children from the first generation background, they are completing the school education, they are completing their college education, they are completing their university education, and they became part of the formal employment, as well as some of them became part of the non-formal employment sector. But the point is, but what is the source? What is the source of this development? How the children from the working class background witnessed the development process within a one generation? That means within the span of 10 to 20 years, the students from the first generation background, at least 25 to 30% of the students from the first generation background are in a position to witness the very idea of upward mobility. So therefore, my dear friends, here what's good, one has to understand that education directly and indirectly promotes the development. From here, we need to understand development from the perspective of economic mobility. From the perspective of economic mobility, we need to understand education from the perspective of social mobility. So, irrespective of their caste, irrespective of their occupations, the moment they enter into higher education, the moment they enter into employment, they generally they were treated with a sense of equality by the other communities, whereas other classes. Otherwise, without education, they are not going to be treated as equals in the society. So, therefore, my dear friends, the idea of equality is very much cultivated by the idea of universalization of school education, as well as, let's say, access to higher education. So therefore, my dear friends, so what I want to tell you is that education primarily works as a works as a bridge between the different classes, the upper classes and the working classes. So now the point is that, so because of education, education also creates a critical consciousness. So here, when I'm talking about critical consciousness, number one, it primarily cultivates a sense of equality. It primarily allows the educated people their to assert their rights. And also, overall, education primarily enables the process of dignity, which is primarily, let's say, which primarily which primarily uh, which is not part of the dignity is not part of the working class people. All the upper class and the middle class people, they look down at the working class people because they are not educated, because they are part of the lower occupations. So, my dear friends, so this is where one need to understand the idea that education means equality, education means mobility, and education means dignity. I am taking this particular perspective from the perspective of the working class people. But now the question is, what is the meaning of education from the perspective of empowerment? Because we are not only talking about sustainable development, but how to understand education from the perspective of empowerment. If you look at carefully, my dear friends, although there are some women faculty members here, and for the last 40 years, one of the key concepts which primarily dominated the social science literature is the idea of empowerment. If you look at carefully, primarily promotes promotes access to employment, and access to employment promotes access to employment promotes the sense of empowerment. What do you mean by sense of empowerment? The empowerment is primarily defined from the perspective of one's own ability to assert their rights, one's own ability to use the multiple spaces of the society without fear. Empowerment means one's own ability to participate in political process, economic process, and diverse socio-cultural spheres of life. That means, my dear friends, the idea of empowerment is primarily visualized within the framework of the gender. So, especially from the perspective of women, though women were primarily, let's say, were given, women were given education for almost 100 years, but the true sense, the only very hardly 5% of the women from the upper classes in pre-independent India or in the post-independent India, hardly some 30% or 30 to 40% of women from the middle class background, they were in a position to complete the school education, or some of them were hardly 20% of them were in a position to reach the university education. But if you look at carefully, we we find only 10% of the women became part of the formal employment. But thanks to the government of India's affirmative action policies, most of the state governments have implemented the 33% reservation for women, both in education and employment, as well as in the Panchayati Raj institutions. So therefore, one can find that the growing number of women in diverse spheres of life. So this is where, my friends, once again, we're talking about the idea of empowerment. Empowerment should be defined from the perspective of one's own ability, or one's ability to assert their rights without fear. So, and also one's own ability to aspire for the positions of power, one's own ability to aspire for the positions of power. So now the question is, if you look at very carefully, the literature says that because of let's say, because the number of women, the proportion of women who are going to higher education, the number is day by day is increasing, and because of that, the women are, at least the highly educated women, are in a position to use their autonomy in a much more meaningful sense. So therefore, my dear friends, the idea, this is where we need to understand the fact that education is a tool of social justice. If you look at very carefully, in pre-education, when there was no education for women, women were primarily deprived of the critical awareness, right? So therefore, the most of the women were subjected to the diverse forms of humiliation, diverse forms of discrimination, and diverse forms of exclusion because of the patriarchal prejudice. Because of the patriarchal prejudice, and the people, the men used to think that women, there's no need of education for women. But my dear friends, if you look at the 100 years of educational journey and 100 years of women's movement, so one can say that women's movement always strived for the idea of the women's movement always demanded for, let's say, universalization of school education and universalization of higher education for women. So therefore, my dear friends, we're talking about the very idea of education. Education has education plays significant role in the case of women. That means despite of their, let's say, position for their, despite of their, let's say, upper class position, despite of their upper caste position, but because they are women, they were not given equal opportunities on par with the men until recently. Until recently. So now, thanks to the liberalization, privatization, and globalization, and and also the ICT revolution, and because of the all these changes, one can say that all these changes are working towards the critical consciousness, and the mainstream society also started accepting women as equal citizens on par with them. So of course there is a long road to go, but still I wish to say argue that education to a large extent played very vital role in creating a critical consciousness among the women towards the autonomy as well as towards the aspirations at the higher level. So now if you look at very carefully, women were also, the literature on gender and development primarily argues that it is the women who is to play very vital role in working towards the development as well as sustainable development. That means, my dear friends, as the liberal feminist scholars, they more or less agree with the very idea of the nature and culture debate. We're talking about nature and culture debate. So women are primarily equated with nature. Women are equated with nature, and women are referred as more sensitive towards the nature protection compared to the men. When men are referred as the exploitators of the nature, women are generally overall women are referred as the protectors of the nature. So given this kind of understanding, and also those who are familiar with some of the environmental movements, there's a famous movement way back to 1970s happened in Uttar Pradesh, and now the name of the movement is the Chipko movement. Chipko movement, that is embracing the trees or hugging the trees. That means there was a movement to protect the environment. So, my dear friends, the basic idea here is that women are generally referred as the people who are known for protecting the nature compared to the man. So that's where, if you look at very carefully, before the rise of the agrarian revolution, especially in the case of women were women used to play very vital role in let's say in the pre-agricultural stages, where and also women also played very vital role in agrarian economies. So now the question is that, my dear friends, when we're talking about the idea of the education for sustainable development, what are the means? What are the means to promote the sustainable development is an important point. What are the means to promote the sustainable development? So uh, we generally read the number of things as a part of the textbooks, as a part of the everyday experiences. But before I wish to let's say move forward, I wish to know, at least from some of you, about what are the ways or what are the important means to promote the sustainable development. Any one of you? What are the important to follow in order to promote the sustainable development.
Ecological perspective, respected sir. Ecological perspective is one of the most important aspect and welfare economics. Professor Amartya Sen, Mahatma Gandhi, and other social thinkers highlighted that nowadays, unfortunately, the economic growth is considered as development, as if big belly is a sign of a health. It is not at all. Such issues, vital issues, nature-human relationship, and the new avenues that may help for balanced ecological development, the gap between rich and poor, the atrocities by the bullies, each and every stakeholder. A nation like India is essentially an institution with an organic unity. In a living body, all organs should be important. Otherwise, there will be abnormal development. That is very ugly. Unfortunately, this is the present scenario. We are very eager if you highlight the role of each stakeholders and these cardinal issues. We are enjoying the lecture. The request ball is in your court. Please proceed.
Okay, thank you very much for your input. Any other? Any other? I would like to share what is your idea of, let's say, sustainable development, and what are the means and mechanisms to ensure the sustainable development?
Few research scholars are exploring this topic, but we are very eager.
Okay, thank you. So, my dear friends, as our friend rightly mentioned, almost 100 years ago, Mahatma Gandhi, in his famous book, the Hind Swaraj, he made a vehement critique of the modern civilization, the vehement critique of the Western civilizational discourses. He made a vehement critique of Western civilizational discourse. So, what do you mean by critiquing the Western civilizational discourse? So, if you look at very carefully, my dear friends, most of us, knowingly or unknowingly, we are victims of the colonial mindset, or we are victims of the development from the perspective of growth. As our friend rightly says, rightly said, we tend to believe that development means the physical form, right? Which should be shown in the form of, let's say, building constructing an apartment with 50 floors, or the number goes on. That means we want to compare only with the developed countries in the form of a physical growth. Yes, Amartya Sen and all the welfare economists, they always talk about the fundamental difference between growth and development on the one hand, and development and human development on the other hand, human development and sustainable development on the other hand. There are different stages, different layers of development. But the question is, as long as the people of India who followed the indigenous forms of knowledge systems, as well as when they followed the idea of resources from the perspective of public good, my dear friends, India, or for that matter, most of the, let's say, Asian African countries, they led a kind of a sustainable, let's say, economic order. Sustainable economic order. As I mentioned, when I started my class, I started with saying that people were known for approaching or use are known for approaching the forest only for their basic need. All the Adivasi, all the tribal communities, even today, for them, forest is the mother. Forest is the goddess, right? So, but the difference is that they follow the need-based approach. All the people, even now the tribal communities and people of India, that means the mainstream communities also, until pre-liberation era, they followed the nature with a need-based approach. But after the liberalization, privatization, and globalization, most of the people, including the farmers and all the people, they are approaching the nature with a greed, need versus greed. Need versus greed is primarily responsible for the very idea of the very idea of this exploitation. So that this is the essence of the capitalism. Producing the surplus, accumulation of profit, exploiting the nature, exploiting the labor, or exploiting the other countries. So, my dear friends, and exploiting the nature for the present generation, not leaving anything for future generation. All these are very much part of the capitalist endeavor. But this is where, my dear friends, we need to learn some of the best lessons from Mahatma Gandhi, who spoke about the very idea of the Hind Swaraj, where he made a critique of the Western notion of development, and he was arguing for the development based on the indigenous model. So we are talking about the indigenous model. He was talking about the Gram Swaraj. So the Gram Swaraj is all about the idea of promoting the indigenous occupations, indigenous goods, and promoting the idea of the sustainable livelihood among the people, which are going to be which are going to sustain for a long and minor friends. But the point is that the when you look at the present day context, the growing levels of highest levels of unemployment, highest levels of underemployment is because of the wide gap between the demand and supply. Because the modernity or this idea of modern development primarily primarily argues or primarily cultivates the idea that only those people who are highly educated, they are going to be given a good jobs, or they are going to get a good jobs. But as all of us know that, despite of accessing higher education, but only hardly 20 to 30% of the people who attends very good colleges, who attends very good universities, not only in India but especially in the Western countries, only these are the people we are getting good jobs when compared to the rest of the society. So therefore, my dear friends, we're talking about the idea of the development. First of all, we need to evolve the indigenous models of development, because a country like India, which represents the highest form of diversity and highest forms of ecological diversity, as our friend rightly mentioned, we primarily represents the highest levels of ecological diversity. So, as all of us know that there is a positive relation between ecology and knowledge. We need to develop the knowledge on the basis of the ecological uniqueness. We need to develop the economies based on the nature of the ecologies, right? And we have to we need to promote the local industry, or the local industries on the basis of the available, let's say, local resources and ecological conditions. So that's where, my dear friends, first of all, we need to learn some best lessons from the writings of Mahatma Gandhi and his idea of Hind Swaraj. That is one part. And apart from this, what is the role of education in promoting the critical awareness about the sustainable futures or sustainable development? If you look at very carefully, my dear friends, on the one hand, the policy makers, including the political leaders, bureaucrats, and also the political leaders and bureaucrats, and also the private parties, private parties, that means including everyone, including all the citizens, irrespective of their class background, upper class, middle class, and lower classes. All these people, all the classes are known for, let's say, exploiting the nature, and they simply cut the trees just to, let's say, build their houses, or to facilitate to clear their roads and so on and so forth. But the point is, how many how many people are planting the trees? Here, what is the role of the government and what is the role of the people? So this is where, my dear friends, as most of the economists are talking about the PPP model, public-private partnership, right, and also public-private participation, not only partnership, but public-private participation. But here we need to talk about the very idea of the participation from below, or people-centric participation, or people-centric development. If that's where, my dear friends, on the one hand, we are working towards the ecological destruction, but we are not working towards ecological reconstruction, right? When you are, let's say, removing some trees, but at the same time, one has to ensure the alternative resources. And also, one needs to talk about the sorry, one need to talk about the recycling approach. So this is where, my dear friends, we need to learn some of the best lessons from a countries like Singapore, because on the one hand, the country is witnessing highest level of rains. On the other hand, the some regions are simply drying without any rains. So, my dear friends, we need to also talk about how to use the natural resources in a meaningful manner, which can be work in a distributive form of justice. Because we need to use the natural resources for distributive justice across the regions, the across the farming community of India. Right. So this is where, my dear friends, I wish to invoke the critical pedagogy, critical curriculum and critical pedagogy as a part, as a means to promote the sustainable futures. So if you look at carefully how far our school textbooks talks about the environmental education, how far our teachers talk about the importance of environmental justice, because we're talking about the very idea of environment. As most of us, we tend to forget that this very environment belong to all the people, where human being is only one part. We are talking about the animals, we are talking about the birds, and so on and so forth. But unfortunately, my dear friends, we tend to assume that the nature belong to the men. That means the nature belong to the human beings, but we are not bothered about the other species of the universe. So now the question is, what is the role of the education at a various level, both the school education and higher education? So, my dear friends, though at one level the schools are known for promoting some basic lessons about the importance of, let's say, environmental education, but most of the times it is primarily used as a kind of eye washing exercise. Nobody takes this environmental education very seriously. So, my dear friends, because we are not understanding the importance of environmental education for the future generations. So this is where, my dear friends, the schools have the potential. The schools, or for that matter, higher education institutions, have the potential in promoting the critical awareness about the environmental justice for environmental future. First point. Secondly, the government has to promote number of events. So only once in a year, in the name of Environmental Day, hardly the government of India, or for that matter the world, all over the world, they declare one particular day as Environmental Day. Only on that particular day, most of the bureaucrats or policy makers, they pay some kind of lip service, and no one bothers from next day onwards. So now the other important point, my dear friends, we need to understand the role of the civil society organizations. Civil society organizations have to play a very vital role. So though at a global level, we are talking about the UNDP, UNO, and UNESCO, and number of global organizations, a number of global NGOs, which talks about the importance of environmental justice as far the future sustainable environment. But my dear friends, at the empirical level, how far, how far the human being, how far the NGOs, both in the NGOs in the developing countries, are taking keen interest in promoting the critical awareness about the importance of, let's say, environment, not for the from the perspective of present, but from the perspective of future. So that's where, my dear friends, I feel that we need to create a imaginative education system which is going to ensure, which is going to ensure which is going to ensure the respecting the nature, and also preserving the natural resources. That means, my dear friends, we're talking about the idea that even today, most of us, we are exploiting the natural resources. Of course, but there are different types of natural resources. People are talking about the wind. People are talking about the which are everlasting in nature. For example, how to use the sunlight for, let's say, to even to run the vehicles. And though we are talking of those to a certain extent, some of the educational institutions are making use of the sunlight for, let's say, electricity, to save the electricity and so on and so forth. But my dear friends, how to popularize the importance of non-conventional, let's say, resources, non-conventional resources for better future. So this is where, my dear friends, though the policymakers are very much aware of, let's say, they are very much aware of the alternative resources which have the potential to fill the traditional sources of resources for the sustainable future. But somewhere along the line, there is a mismatch. There is a wide gap between this global interventions and state commitment as well as civil society activism. So there was a mismatch between the global commitments. That means the the commitment for the better futures at the global level. That is the first point. Secondly, there is also the state, both at the central level and state level. They were not that much keen to promote. They are also the state has failed to institutionalize the importance of environmental justice for sustainable futures. And that's why if you look at very carefully, we see the unnatural, let's say, events, the highest rainfall in, let's say, in non-rainy season, and also the higher levels of temperatures in non, let's say, in a month like August and September, we see the higher levels of temperature like a summer. So, my dear friends, the entire season, the traditional knowledge systems which are based on the seasons are primarily undergoing a radical, let's say, changes. So now, when the traditional seasons are also undergoing radical changes, what kind of lessons one can learn from the natural, what kind of lessons one can learn when the nature is departing from the culture? Because until recently, there was a positive relation between nature and culture. That's why, based on the positive relation, the farmers and other traditional as the farmers as well as the fishermen and all, they were known for developing their own idea of technologies, traditional technologies, to use the resources in a meaningful manner. But one can see a kind of reversing trend in the whole process. So this is where, my dear friends, I believe or I feel that the critical education for sustainable development, which is very much important. But how to promote critical education about the importance of sustainable development is to should start from the family, and it should be promoted at school level. It should be promoted even at the college level and the university level. And not only the educational institution, it should be promoted even in the work culture as well as in the diverse public spaces. I think this is where one can learn from the countries which are primarily committed to the very idea of the sustainable futures, especially what kind of lessons we can learn from countries like what kind of lessons one can learn from the Scandinavian countries, small countries like Finland, New Zealand, Switzerland. These are the small countries, and Sweden. These are the countries which are known for protecting their environment in a meaningful manner. You will be surprised to know that most of the people, from old people to all even the small school going children, that means at the age of 3 to almost 90 years, all of them even now they ride a bicycle in a countries like Netherlands, Sweden. Cycle is a very common phenomena in these countries. But my dear friends, the middle class, they feel it ashamed to look at the cycle. Right? No middle class men and women, they are willing to even look at the cycle. Only they may buy a cycle for the children when their children are very small, when they are below the 10 years of age. So this is where we need to understand the very idea of the false consciousness about the status without respecting the commitment for the future. So this is where, my friends, I feel that we need to learn some best lessons from the countries which are following the best practices, and this is where I feel that education as education critical education is going to sensitize the government and also is going to sensitize the civil society organizations in promoting the importance of environmental justice for the diverse sections of the societies across the countries and across the cultures on the one hand, and also which is the sustainable development is very much important for diverse species on the planets. So that's where, my dear friends, the education, meaningful education, is a precondition for sustainable development. So, with this, I wish to stop here and I'll be very happy to take up the questions, comments, and clarifications. Thank you.
Very good evening, sir. Am I enough audible? May I ask a doubt?
Yes, please introduce yourself and proceed. Please introduce yourself and proceed.
There is so much weightage and importance is given to sustainable.
No, you are not clear. Once again, please ask me. Can you repeat the question? I was unable to hear the question. There is no clarity. Please repeat the question. Ram Prasad Kalapure. Yes, please ask your question.
Respected sir, few questions are shared in the chat box, but besides that, I would like to ask one question because you are we can understand the invaluable value of your exploration. In the last time you were there in the international event, and we understand and humbly acknowledge the mutual academic relationship between you and Honorable Principal Dr. Digambar Ganjewar sir. Sir, right from the Elizabethan worldview, human being, very unfortunately, has been considering the master product and the supreme being in the great chain of being. Human being is behaving as if he or she is the sole controller of the universe and using various wiles and guiles and justifying the ideology. You rightly pointed out how human beings have been exploiting the ideologies of colonialism, exploiting masses and nature, and ransacking the nature. My simple question is that what are the apt antidote and panacea to such kind of the greedy ideology for sustainable development? The request ball is in your court, please.
Thank you very much, dear friend. It's a very good question. If you look at very carefully, the modern state, especially the colonial state. Hello, am I audible? Hello, am I audible, dear friends?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Okay. So if you look at very carefully, it is a modern state which is primarily responsible for institutionalizing the very idea of dominating the nature. If you look at very carefully, the idea of dominating nature started with the invention of science and technology, and the diverse tools and techniques were primarily used to taming the nature. Taming the nature is considered as one of the greatest symbols of civilization. The more you control the nature, the more the human being is considered as a superior. That means the superiority of the human being is primarily associated with taming the nature or exploiting the nature. But as you are very much aware that, my dear friends, though it is a capitalist spirit, it is a capitalist spirit which primarily drives the very idea of deepening the notions of exploitation and universalization of exploitation of natural resources, starting from the Orissa mains to the construction of big dams in a states like Arunachal Pradesh. But what we need to understand is that despite of the advancement of science and technology, and which is controlled by the state and capitalist, but you will be surprised. You have to understand that, my dear friends, the nature is always known for teaching the biggest lessons to the human beings at different historical phases. Whenever the human being feel that he or she has achieved the great advancement, but the nature is showing in a different manifestation. The best example is, so we have seen, all of us, we are witness to the COVID pandemic. The entire world came to a standstill, like whatever we used to see in only Bollywood movies, like in the pre-1990s. We never ever imagined that world comes to only a kind of stationary positions without a movement. So where not a single crow in the world as primarily was not allowed to move from one place to another. It was unimaginable, but that is the power of the nature. So what I want to tell you is that despite of the human endeavor to control the nature, but the nature always demonstrated its superiority in different manifestations, in the form of a big, let's say, rains or floods, or in the form of a, let's say, the COVID, and so on and so forth. So my argument is that human beings should understand that my response to your question straight away is that the government should not be victim of capitalism. When governments are victims of capitalism or capitalist spirit, in the sense exploiting the nature beyond the control, exploiting the nature not for the present generation, even for accumulation of profit, I think that's where we are going to witness this kind of crisis. As long as you use the nature for the present, there is no problem. But the moment you use the nature for a greedy purpose, we are going to witness this kind of, let's say, uneven development. This is my answer. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. May I ask a question?
Please.
Yes, please.
I am Hala Sultan, a PhD scholar at Bama University. First of all, thank you very much for discussing this essential global issue. Secondly, my simple question is, what's the role of balanced ecology for the sustainable development?
So again, what is the role of?
What's the role of balanced ecology for the sustainable development?
Yes.
Thank
So
you,
What
sir.
is what is the role of sustainable or balanced economy for sustainable development?
okay, thank you. So that's what, my friend. This is where I wish to invoke Mahatma Gandhi's and his notion of Hind Swaraj and his notion of Gram Swaraj. So the basic idea is that when you develop the economy based on the local needs, when you develop the economy based on the local needs, these economies are going to survive for a long, and these economies are going to provide employment to the local people. So that's how we can ensure the inclusive economy where men and women are going to be party to that kind of economy. But when you look at the economy from the perspective, when you subscribe to the market economy, only the highly educated men, first of all, are going to be given employment opportunities. So which ultimately leads to the higher levels of migration, which also primarily disturb the family structure, and it also leads to some kind of dependency, so on and so forth. And this also leads to the very idea of the concentration of people in only one place. We have seen what is happening in the cities like Bombay, Delhi, Hyderabad, Calcutta, and Bangalore. If you look at all these metropolitan cities, where these cities are hosting people of more than 1 crore population are living in one particular cities. But if you look at carefully, these cities are primarily developed. Let's say in Hyderabad, if you take Hyderabad city example, 100 years ago, the Nizams, they developed the city for the sake of only 10 lakh population. At that time, the population was maybe, it was around only 5 lakhs something. So, but the point is, when more than one crore plus people are living, what kind of sustainability we are going to ensure. That's where when you look at the entire urban planning is completely collapsed. Whenever even the people are not in a position to even live a peaceful life whenever there is at least a rain for even only half an hour or 1 hour. So, my dear friends, this is where my argument is that we need to follow the distributive economic system, the distribution of economic resources all over the let's say states in India and all over the regions within the states, and that's how the distributive economic model is going to be much more meaningful when compared to the concentrative model of economic. This is my answer to your question, friend.
Other participants may feel free to ask few questions because we have to understand the invaluable value of such kind of forums where studious resources persons are available. Honorable Professor Nagaraju Gunde Meda sir, when there is the question of policy matters, we at the national level become very much helpless. Though time and again our scholars, right from Pune to chancellors and vice chancellors, are highlighting the boon of new education policy. But few days back, one of the most important scholar from Aurangabad city, now known as Chhatrapati Sambhajinagar, none other than late Bapu Sahib Kaldate, give a very witty remark that education policy is nothing but a donkey's tail. Where the donkey goes, the tail follows. It is happening. In this context, my question is, what is India's policy for sustainable development and how the said policy stimulates the international policy, because sustainable development, balanced ecology is simultaneously a local, personal, familial, state, national, and international issues. All stakeholders should come together and at one and the same time, they should fight like a perpetual warrior with ignited mind for sustainable development for unto this last, for masses, welfare of the nature and for all. Request ball is in your court, sir. Respected sir.
So, very good question, dear friend. So, as I said, starting from the writings of Mahatma Gandhi, followed by Kothari Commission of 1965, followed by 1986 New Education Policy of 1986, followed by the post 21st century, or sorry, post 20th century policy of National Education Policy 2020, which is the first policy in the 21st century India. So, if you look at carefully, my dear friends, this policy when you look at from the perspective of let's say from the perspective when you look at from the perspective of people, it primarily celebrates the idea of indigenous models of development with reference to use of vernacular use of vernacular languages as medium, or use of the home language and mother tongues as the medium of education, and also it talks about the local incorporating the local histories, local ecologies as a part of the social science lessons as well as science lessons. So, at one level, this document primarily talks about the very idea of the decentralized education. But this is where not only this policy, way back to 2005, the NC of 2005, popular known as National Curriculum Framework 2005, also talks about the very idea of the global approach with a local sensitivity. That means the curriculum should adopt, or the curriculum should reflect the local conditions of the people. Then only the student, or the child and student, is going to relate with the local conditions. So, as we are very much aware that we follow the NCERT textbooks, right, at the national level, and we also follow SCERT textbooks at the state level. Though which are supposed to the SCERT textbooks are supposed to be, let's say, local friendly or regional friendly, but to large extent, almost 80% of our textbooks more or less, let's say, simply copy the NCERT textbooks, and only 20% only they incorporate the local cultures, local ecological systems, local practices with the diverse, let's say, geographies and so on and so forth. So now the point is, my friend, is that India, you need to understand the context. You need to understand the people's, let's say, life and people's aspiration. We, though one can learn some lessons from the Western countries, but we can't simply. It is very difficult to incorporate. It's difficult to inculcate. It's very difficult to inculcate in the mind of the people, because even now almost 30% of the people are struggling for their basic needs. When 30% of the people are struggling for the basic needs, it's very difficult to justify. It's very difficult to justify the idea of a sustainable development. The idea of sustainable development. So the point is that when a Adivasi people, when the tribal communities in Adilabad district or in Maharashtra or in anywhere in Orissa, when they are trying to, let's say, take some part of forest for cultivation, as a government, if government goes and try to stop them, so they are going to resist against this kind of measures, because for them, there first of all, the government has to allow them, because the government has to allow them, because they are cultivating the land for the purpose of agriculture. So as they are not a skilled people who can be employed as a part of the modern organizations, so the one and only options which left for them is the the land which is available to these communities. So therefore, what I want to tell you is that I think there's no meaning in simply blaming the only education policy or making some kind of sarcastic comments as a we are not supposed to accept those kind of sarcastic comments. The point is that we are living our society is highly uneven society. On the one hand, we have 30% of the population, we are living a middle class life. When we have some 10% of the population, we are leading a upper class life, and remaining 60% of the population, and the 60% of the population, they are struggling for their livelihood. So now how to convince their mind as a part of this sustainable development is an important point. First of all, you need to question to yourself, and we need to question to all of us. I think that's where, my friends, we need to we need to take inspiration from the curriculum. We need to take the best practices of best practices from our classroom experiences, and we need to take the best practices from government, both central government and state government. But at the end of the day, we need to understand that in a countries like India, as we are developing countries, it takes some time. We can't expect miracle in one day. Please remember that all the Western countries, they took almost 200 years to reach this level after exploiting the world. Most of the Western countries like Britain, France, Netherlands, and Portuguese, these are the countries which colonized the world and exploited all the, let's say, resources, both economic resources, natural resources, and human resources. So they are living on the wealth of all the developing countries. So therefore, my dear friends, you please remember that developing countries take some more time to accept the agenda related to the sustainable development. We are in the process, but it takes some time. This is my answer to you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Participants may feel free to raise few questions, vital questions. If
Yes, sir. I have a question, please.
please proceed.
How can technology be used to support sustainable practices in education?
It's a very good point, my dear friends. As you are, yes, this is where technology has a potential. Technology has that means one set of technologies were known for using some type of technologies are, but at the same time, my dear friends, technology has some certain set of technology has a potential to work towards the sustainable development. So that's where day by day we are developing diverse technologies with reference to water preservations, with reference to, let's say, improving the agricultural outputs, As I gave the example of agrarian revolution, especially the green revolution. Green revolution has created a miracle in the context of India, which is primarily responsible for the feeding the nation. The feeding the nation is primarily achieved through the green revolution. That means the food grains are very much available, at least in the government godowns. So now another important point is that we're talking about the sustainable when you're talking about sustainable development from the perspective of technological interventions. The technology has the potential to facilitate the life of the people. So from the even by earlier people used to cultivate only twice in a year, but now because of the seeds, because of the diverse seeds which are going to give you the yield only within 2 months or 3 months and so on and so forth, and also the quantum of the output is also very huge. So I want to argue that, or I believe that, that's my I believe that some set of technologies have the potential to ensure the sustainable futures, because if you look at the entire let's say automobile industry, the entire automobile industry is slowly moving from the petrol and diesel, let's say, so diesel resources to the more EV industry kind of thing. So these are some of the, let's say, technological interventions which are going to ensure sustainable future. But we need to, let's say, explore the multiple technological interventions for effective and sustainable futures. This is what I feel.
Sir, hello.
Yes,
Sir,
yes,
am I audible?
yes. Please proceed.
Please proceed.
Sir, I'm Temujin from Chaitanya Bharati Institute of Technology. Sir, I have a question, like actually doubt, like I have today I have studied in a newspaper that China has built a dam, Three Gorges Dam, and that dam is storing 10 trillion gallons of water, which is a massive amount of mass accumulated at one place, because of which Earth's rotation has slowed down for zero point 0.06 microseconds, and the Earth is also observed that it has started to drift away from the sun. So, because of massive structures, massive constructions like this, Earth's rotation has been disturbed. So, if it happens at local level or national level, then country will be taking care of it. But because of one country's intervention on ecology and the whole globe is affected, then how it will be addressed? Who will address this issue at global level? There is a national level and local level, but when one country's action is affecting whole globe, like globe is moving, then who will be able to address it? Who has the authority to control them? Or is there any authority or no authority at all? That's my doubt, sir.
It's a very good question, my dear friends. As you know, as you are very much aware that the technology is used as a weapon to control other nations. So the making of big dams, which are beyond human imagination. So when you're talking about the construction of big dams in the early 50s during Nehru times, the dams are considered as temples of modern India, because dams were sources of, let's say, agriculture in a developing country like India in 1950s. But if you look at literature, almost all the economists, developmental economists, they're arguing for small dams, not big dams. But the question is, in countries like China, as a part of the global competition, as a part of the global domination, they are trying to come up with mega ventures in diverse fields, including the dam construction. So the point is that we are talking about who controls other nations, because you are very much aware that until 1990s or until 1947, the Britain was considered as a superpower all over the world. Britain, from 1947 to 1990s, the Russia and America were considered as the superpowers. And the post 1990s, we are living in a unipolar world. That is, only the America is considered as the most powerful country on the earth. But now, for last 30 years, China is emerging as one of the important competitor for the American domination. So my point is that some of the countries, they deliberately construct these kind of mega dams even to disturb even the international policies. So therefore, to be honest with you, there is no straightforward answer. These are part of the global, let's say, domination. These are part of global domination. So therefore, it's very difficult to convince China, or no one is going to convince China, because as we have witnessed during COVID time, even though the UNO and other organizations, they were not interested to label or declare China was a main reason for the global corona pandemic. Similarly, most of the technologies, that means the technologies of development and technologies of destruction. Please remember, technologies of development and technologies of destructions are primarily controlled by the highly developed countries. Highly developed countries, like all top countries like America, Britain, France, and Germany, and so on and so forth, and Japan, and now China. So the question is, my dear friends, these are part of the global domination strategies. No one is going to. This is part of the global game. That's what I my answer.
Professor Nagaraj Gundemeda sir, unfortunately there is a perpetual struggle between culture and nature, and in that struggle, culture is considered as very, very superior. In fact, there should be a synthesis correlationship, but the dominant ideology, as explored by Jacques Derrida in one of the most important essay, structure, sign, and play in the discourses of human sciences, and how human sciences justified that dominance of culture. For example, whenever there is a issue comes in parliament regarding the road construction, and they justify under the development, we are helpless, we have to take the decision. At that time, common man feels that, oh, there is something shortcoming in the constitution, we have to take the opinion of the stakeholders of the protector of environment. You rightly gave the example of Chipko Andolan and all these things. In that context, what are the new avenues for sustainable development in the disciplines like humanities, commerce, and science? And what should be the action plan at individual level? Because this is a global issue, but at least we have an individual solution as well in the form of your message to the young and aspiring students attending this faculty development program. Kindly note that the specialty of the said faculty development program is it is meant for aspiring bona fide students, research scholars, and teachers simultaneously. Please proceed.
Very good questions, my dear friend. So I believe in a synergy between science disciplines, social science and humanities disciplines, and commerce discipline. Because all said and done, we need economy is the driving force of humanity. So therefore, we can't simply, let's say, subscribe to the pre-modern idea that let us only worship the nature. We are not, human beings are not the 20th century and 21st century human beings, right? We can't expect them to worship the nature because of the advancement of science and technology, right? Though people believe in God, but they are not interested to worship the nature. That phase is over, because after all, the human beings, the human endeavor is all about the advancement of the human life, advancement of, that is, providing effective, better facilities for a, let's say, human life. That is the essence of the, let's say, human culture and civilization. But given this point, as you rightly mentioned, when you're talking about the ideological fight between the culture and nature, the culture and nature. So in pre-modern era, there was a harmony between nature and culture. Even now, to a large extent, most of the tribal communities, they are living with harmony with nature. So the tribal culture is a manifestation of nature. If you go to Odisha, if you go to Andhra Pradesh or Telangana, if you go to any part of Maharashtra or any part of the country, you will know most of the other tribal communities, they worship the nature, right? So that's one of the reason why most of the tribal communities in Odisha, they are not only fighting to protect their lands or protect the forest, but also they are protecting against all the MNC companies to protect their sacred space, their sacred god, their sacred goddess, which is very much there in the form of a tree or in the form of a stone. So, my dear friend, so now the question is, when there was a symbiotic relationship between the nature and culture in the pre-modern era, even now, which continue to exist among the tribal communities, despite of their exposure to the so-called development and modernity, but it come to the mainstream society, right? As a part of the developmental endeavor, we generally accept the roads, we accept the railway lines through the forest, right? So this is all about the human, to facilitate the human mobilities, the roads of development, the roads are used as a roads of development. That means the road became the road of progress. So now, given this kind of understanding, the idea is that yet one set of people who are going to be part of the lands, they ultimately they have to sacrifice. So, like a typical example of most of the tribal communities who resides besides all the, let's say, rivers, all the let's say hill areas. At the time of construction of dams, all of them are expected to vacate their let's say hamlets in the name of development, because ultimately the development is going to be useful for non-tribal communities, but someone has to, let's say, sacrifice. So now the point is that my argument is that we're talking about this very idea of the nature, culture, and commerce. We need to follow a kind of we need to adopt an approach based on the need based approach. I always believe in the need based approach rather than the exchange based approach. So there is a difference between the need based there is a difference between use value versus exchange value. Use value versus exchange value. So that means the very what do you say, the most valuable trees in let's say forest are also used only from the perspective of usable value when you're talking about the tribal communities or in the mainstream communities also in pre-globalization era or until 1980s, right? They were known for using the nature only from the perspective of use value. But the moment you convert the use value into exchange value, then the moment you convert from use value to exchange values, which is going to work on the notion of the profit. So, my dear friend, the profit primarily drives the people towards the exploitation of the nature. So I'm sure some of you have watched the movie called Pushpa movie. In Pushpa movie, the basic story is all about exploiting the forest resource, especially the most precious trees in the forest. So therefore, my dear friends, I always believe in sustainable, let's say, uses for sustainable future. That is my answer.
Thank you, Honorable Professor Nagaraju Gundemala sir. The way you have given the answer reminds us Dalai Lama's quotation, happiness is the highest form of health. And what is the source of happiness? The balanced nature as a boon. Sir, thank you very much for everything. Let us hope that your lecture, the way you presented the lecture, will increase and stimulate our happiness index permanently. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. As much as we would love to extend this question and answer session, unfortunately, we are on some time constraints. So thank you, Dr. Navle, for for having such good questions, and thank you, Nagraju sir, for answering these questions exceptionally. And also thank you for gracing us with such an insightful and knowledgeable session. With that, I would now like to propose the vote of thanks. On behalf of the Lions Club of Malad Borivali College, Charity Sir, Prahlad Ray Dalmia Lions College of Commerce and Economics, Mumbai, and Rajmata Jijau Mahavidyalaya Kiledaru, Research Foundation of India, New Delhi, and National Institute of Foreign Trade, Mumbai, I extend my heartfelt gratitude, first and foremost, to the resource person, Professor Dr. Nagaraju, sir, for having graced the faculty development program with his esteemed presence and rendered the keynote address. Your valuable time and insights have immensely enriched our understanding for the research process, and we are truly honored to have had the opportunity to engage in a meaningful dialogue with such esteemed personality. I would like to express our deepest appreciation to the patrons and members of the management of Prahlad Ray Dalmia Lions College of Commerce and Economics and Rajmata Jijau Mahavidyalaya, who have stood strong with us in all our endeavors. We thank Research Foundation of India, New Delhi, and National Institute of Foreign Trade, Mumbai, for collaborating with us, and a special note of appreciation towards Dr. Ajay Jain, National Coordinator of Research Foundation of India, and Professor Vikas Pandey, Executive Director of National Institute of Foreign Trade, Mumbai. A special appreciation and gratitude to Professor Dr. D.N. Ganjewar, Principal of Prahlad Ray Dalmia Lions College of Commerce and Economics, Mumbai, and also Dr. G.K., Principal of MSP Mandal Rajmata Jijau Mahavidyalaya, Kiledaru. Our heartfelt thanks goes to all the members of the organizing committee, faculty members, administrative staff, technical team, and student volunteers whose collective efforts and dedication have contributed positively towards this faculty development program. Thank you, one and all. I kindly now request everybody to please switch on your video for a matter of few seconds for a small photo session.
So thank you very much, all of you, for your kind attention and also very important. Let's say sharing my thoughts with all of you. I am especially thankful to the principal sir and all of you for this great experience. Thank you very much.
Thank
Sir,
you.
please.
So can I leave or
No, few seconds for photo.
okay,
Photo.
okay, sir.
Mohini ma'am, please let me know if the photo is done. All right. I request all the participants to kindly fill the feedback form. The link is being given in the chat box. And once again, thank you, one and all. God bless you all. Thank you for this.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Honorable Professor Nagaraju Gundemela, sir, and all participants. Let us resume this meeting tomorrow
Thank you, sir.
at the assigned time. Thank you. Thank you. Anushka Kamble, ma'am, would you like to give a note for tomorrow's session?
Not as of yet, sir.
Okay. Please let us stop
All right,
here.
sir.
Link would be the same,
Resume
sir,
Yes,
for
sir.
all the sessions. Link would be the same. Not to worry.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
sir.
All the participants are being humbly requested to leave the meeting. Let us resume the said meeting tomorrow.
Also, sir, the feedback link has been shared in the chat box. We request all the participants to fill up the feedback form as well. Thank you so much.